They say it all started with a census, the most common one, as it was once conducted at home. Who lives where, how much they eat, what they suffer from. Only this time, the census was digital, through drones, bases, and surveillance. People were divided into categories: useful, conditional, and ballast. Terms like energy loss, social unprofitability, and parasitic existence have become common. Then they introduced color cards. Green ones got access to distribution. Yellow ones were sent to labor columns. Red ones were filtered. Everything went according to schedule, without shouting. Paddy wagons arrived at night. People were taken for recycling. They said to go south to the recovery camps. In fact, they were never seen again. The cities smelled of soap, charcoal, and hot grease. The factories started working again, but they did not produce machinery, but disposed of biomass. The power remained, but it mutated. The Supreme Committee did not appear publicly. Decisions were sent down through terminals. The purge began from the outskirts, from the elderly, the unemployed, and the disabled. Then came families with children, then everyone who didn't have a connection, a profession, or an apartment in the right area. There was no army, only sanitary cleanup groups, 5 in black, with chips and permits to shoot without trial. We called them the Reapers. If you weren't in the database or the chip wasn't working, you're already dead. They didn't take them all at once, but as if politely. First, temporary departure, then relocation to colony number 12. 6 months later, universities disappeared, then museums, theaters, and archives. Anything that wasn't directly fed was considered unnecessary. We lived in a pipe. It was a dungeon under the welding college, where cranes and generators used to dry. When the fire and gas started coming from above, one guy went down there with his family. He was immediately killed when the cleaners accidentally stumbled upon him and mistook him for a looter. But the path remained. We crawled in through the vent channel, cut off the grate, and crawled in like rats. It was damp, dark, and the walls were overgrown with mold, but at least it didn't blow. Water was dripping from an underground pipe, cloudy, yellow, and rusty. Filtered through bandages, boiled in cans. We slept on pieces of linoleum. From food, crusts, powders, trapped rats. Every day began with checking whether they were breathing or not. Once, old Lesh didn't wake up. He just froze in his sleep, hugging a canister. There were 6 of us. I am a former nurse. Lena is an accountant. She had a boy, mute, with half of his face burned. Old man Vasya, who lost his leg, knew how to fix a stove. Zhenya is a teenager, blind, but with keen hearing. And Dina, the silent girl who hasn't spoken to anyone since her village was burned down. She just nodded, or stared at the wall. We lived as best we could. I went to the surface at night, looking for remnants. Sometimes I found warehouses where looters had already stolen everything. But cans, bags of pills, and bandages remained in the cracks. I stumbled into the precinct officer's office once and took his old first aid kit. It was enough for a month. The surface was empty. The houses stood like rotten teeth. The signs were hanging. The glass was cracked. There is silence in the streets. Sometimes there were distant sounds. The hum of trucks, pops, the roar of engines. I was hiding in the shadows. Corpses were still hanging in some courtyards as a warning. Many of them had a hole in their forehead from a scanner. Without a chip, it's execution. Once I found an old man alive, sitting on a bench and staring at nothing. A chip card was lying nearby. I wanted to speak, but he raised the gun to his temple. I didn't need the noise. I left. He stayed. We didn't expect any help. No humanitarian aid. No signals. The radio was silent. Sometimes an old military channel was caught. Someone was talking about overloading facilities. Then there were codes. Once a week I brought something. Fire paint, shoes, bandages, pills, frozen meat. It seemed to be rat meat, but no one asked. We ate in silence. Lena looked at me as a source, but she didn't say thank you. Vasya sawed the boards until he started coughing up blood. I tried to get antibiotics for him, but I couldn't. He died in the early morning, stinking of rot. We rolled him up in a banner and dropped him into the mine. When I fell asleep, I dreamed of filtration camps. There were concrete hangars, barbed wire, and a queue of people with shaved heads. They were injected in the neck, then taken to a container. They said there was retraining. I knew it was cremation. Whoever came out no longer remembered the name. We were in between, not quite alive, not dead, not needed. But as long as I had the pipe, I could fight. For those who stayed, for the boy, for the girl who was silent, for myself, just to avoid becoming meat. Paperwork was more important than food now. Without a piece of paper, without a chip, you are not a person. You are a biomass. You are a non-core element. They don't consider you alive. Each distribution center had an accounting department, a concrete box with bars where former teachers, accountants, and doctors who had been converted into clerks of the system sat. They were responsible for admission, distribution of rations, registration, and redirection to camps. If you bring at least something, stew, gasoline, pills, you are allowed to the terminal. There you slip in other people's documents, whisper the last name, hoping that the scanner won't beep. Once it beeps, they twist you. The second time they shoot you. Everything is according to the instructions, without emotion. I needed to legalize the street kid. He had neither a chip nor a record in the database. He was born after, in one of the burned villages. If they find out about him, they'll take him away. Orphans without registration go to incubators, closed blocks where loyal slaves are raised. They don't teach children there, they train them. They are used to make technicians, porters, cleaners. I saw one, thin, shaved, with empty eyes. He was silently sorting through the bolts in the warehouse, not looking up at anything. His name was simply Unit. I decided to sneak into the accounting area through the back entrance. I knew that a former acquaintance of Gina's, a doctor with whom we used to take people by ambulance, was working in Sector 17. He had survived, surrendered, and was now a Rank 2 technician. He lived in a container next to the hangar. He had his own bunk and access to the terminal. I came in at night through the sewers, soaked in boots, with the stench of sour blood. He recognized me immediately, turned pale, but let me in. We didn't talk, we just sat there. Then he asked, "Who needs to be brought in?" I said a boy. He nodded. He said it was worth one name instead of another. The next day a guy named Roman Pavlov was on the disposal list. I don't know who it was. Maybe someone with a child too. Maybe just no one. When I was leaving, Gina stopped me. He asked, "Do you still believe that there is a way out?" I said nothing. He added, "Your group is on the list." I stopped. He pointed at the terminal. There are 6 lines on the screen. Our nicknames, our faces, descriptions. Status, preparation for mopping up. Item, collective retirement, after 11 days. I looked at it like it was a dream. I wanted to laugh, but my mouth was dry. "Who gave the order?" I asked. "The system." Gina shrugged his shoulders. "You don't have any chips. You are zeros." I returned to the tube at night. Lena was sleeping with the baby, hugging him as if she could shield herself. Vasya died. I never told her exactly where I dropped him. Zhenya, who was blind, was lying quietly, but he heard me come in. He always did. He raised his head and said softly, "You smell like death." I didn't argue. He was right. In the morning, I packed a backpack. Remnants of bandages, a bottle of painkillers, 2 cans of fish waste, and a wire. I didn't tell anyone where I was going. He just disappeared. It was necessary to find new documents, old tokens, dead chips. A part of the archive remains in the basement of the former registry office. It has not been entered there for a long time because of the gas. If I'm lucky, I'll get at least something to knock down the signal, so that you can replace the entries. On the way, I passed by the ruins of the Social Security Department. There was also a sign there. Unreliable registration point. I knew that people who had questions had been brought here before. From here they went in 3 directions, either to the labor sector, or to processing, or to the correctional. Correctional is when your bones are broken, your vocal cords are cut, and you become a working shadow. They are then put on guard or on a sweep, without words, without thoughts. I saw one up close. He didn't have a face. Just the scar, the plate, and the number on his chest. The registry office was dark and smelled of rot. I was walking from memory. The floor slithered with slime, and water splashed in the distance. On the fourth cabinet I found an old registry. Bundles of cards, codes, dates. I took everything. There was a syringe with sleeping pills in my pocket. If I run into guards, I'll stab them in the neck. If it doesn't work out, I'll tell myself. When I returned, I realized that there was no time. 11 days. Then they will come. Or will leave. Beyond the perimeter. There is no base in the area where there are no antennas. Only rumors. Only footsteps on the ice. But at least it's not filtering. I stood at the entrance to the tube and said, "We're leaving. In 10 days. Otherwise, it's the end." No one objected. No one asked where. Because everything was clear. It was said that there was an archive bunker under the old school. A real one, with concrete walls and hermetic doors, built before the event, when the country was preparing for a war that did not exist. In those days, documentation was brought there. Lists, passes, shelter schemes, medical dossiers. For some reason, these rooms were not razed to the ground during the cleaning, like other archives. Perhaps they were afraid to go there. People whispered that there was a furnace underground, in which not only papers were burned. Someone said that at the bottom there was a tank full of ashes and teeth. I had heard about the room with stairs even before the fall of the connection, but then it seemed nonsense. Now I needed every meter of the subway, every blueprint, every loophole to get my own people off the recycling list. I went out at night, leaving a note, although it was stupid. None of our people could read in the old way. I had to climb through the ventilation duct on the territory of the former dormitory. The doors were broken down, the stairs rotted, and the concrete crumbled under my fingers. Downstairs, there was a smell of rot, wet cloth, and something acrid, as if metal was burning right in his lungs. The first hall was littered with folders, among which rats were swarming. I walked past without looking back. The deeper I went, the colder the air became, and the quieter my head was working. My pulse went down somewhere, and instead of thoughts, there was only one phrase left in my head. Go on. Then it was dark. The terminal was found in the former control room, a round room with ash stains on the walls. In the corner, there was a dummy stuffed animal stretched over tubes, apparently used to practice evacuation. I plugged in the old drive, inserted the backup battery, and the screen came to life. The program was simple, but powerful. The old departmental accounting system. I entered my ID and got access. The list was there. Hundreds of names sorted by status. Neutralized. In processing. Liquidation confirmed. I clicked on, not breathing. Then I saw myself. An old photo. With a robe and a badge. Status. Eliminated. Date. 2 weeks ago. So we were already dead. The system made a decision in advance. It means that all this time we have been living in the red, outside the law, out of tolerance, as mistakes. I found Lena. She was designated as a biologically burdened unit. The boy was listed as an unregistered product of birth, without a number. Zhenya is a negative carrier, blind, useless. Even Dina, who was not talking to anyone, went through the line, non-core element with refusal of socialization. I sat and stared at the screen, and there was no fear. There was rage. Not at them, but at myself, for thinking we still had a chance. Then I saw a folder marked Room Number 7, Thermal Disposal. The protocol is archived. The system required confirmation of the disposed status. I found an entry, a point with coordinates under the school. Diagram, arrow, red cross. It all fit. I made my way deep into the complex, walking through burnt-out tunnels, among the remains of furniture, bones, documents burned in iron cabinets. There was a door at the bottom. Metal, covered with soot, with an engraved plaque. No 7, scrap. I opened it, sliding the hinges with difficulty, and went down the stairs, which no one else cleaned. The room was round. It smelled like a crematorium. I was there once, before the purge, when I was taking corpses away. But here the stench was older, thicker, as if it had been absorbed into the walls. In the center was an industrial furnace, blackening. with a red pipe extending into the ceiling. Charred chains lay on the floor. I do not know why they were there. Perhaps to keep those who resisted. Someone had scratched the word "I am" on the wall with their nails. I stood there and couldn't figure out why I was here. Everything is already clear. Everything has already been decided. We are scum. Dust. We were left with no choice. I turned on the old scanner, picked up the database and copied everything that was there. Lists, statuses, protocols marked to be cleaned. It's not just dead information. This is a verdict signed from above, automatically, without human intervention. This data was a weapon. If we get to the neutral zone and hand them over, maybe at least someone will see that we were crossed out not by accident but by calculation. Probably no one will see it. I'll probably just die with a flash drive in my pocket, somewhere under a fence. I walked back as if in a dream. My feet sank into the mud, and condensation formed on the walls. Drops could be heard in the ventilation. Somewhere above, a train passed, one of the automatic trains that carry corpses to the south. I went out into the night, sat down at the entrance to the pipe, and put my backpack next to it. The boy was asleep. Zhenya was counting aloud on his fingers. Lena was feeding Dina some kind of moss mixture. I said, "We are not on the list. We are shadows." No one answered. I continued. "So it's time to disappear altogether." The next day we started packing. There was no turning back now. The perimeter zone was at least 20 kilometers away. We moved at night, hid during the day. We walked along old country lanes, along dilapidated electrical lines, among overgrown villages where only bones remained. On the first day, one of the drones flew over the road. We were frozen in a ditch, chest deep in mud, with rags on our heads. He didn't stop. Probably the chips really weren't being read anymore. Lena whispered that it was a sign that we were invisible now. I didn't answer. I knew that if they noticed us, they wouldn't be dealing with chips. They'd shoot us right away. No one checks on those who don't officially exist. On the third day, the child's fever rose. He tossed in his sleep, breathing hoarsely. Foam appeared on his lips. I realized that the infection had started. We carried him on a raincoat tent, rolling it into a makeshift stretcher. Dina walked beside him, looked at him, and sometimes touched his forehead. Zhenya walked with a stick like a tentacle, checking the way. We ate once a day. Crusts, berries, whatever we could find. The forest was dense, but from time to time lines flashed through the branches. Wires, substations, old poles with sensors. We stayed away. If there was a current, we could have been detected. If there wasn't, they could have been waiting for us. By the evening of the 5th day, we reached the crosses. That was the name of the village we found on the border of the old zone. The name is unofficial. Crosses stood by the road, carved from plywood, with inscriptions like, "Come, serve, past, pay, no one owes without benefit." The village looked alive. There was smoke and voices. We hid in the woods and watched from there. There was a courtyard in the center, which seemed to be shared. There were people standing there. Each man had a collar around his neck, on which hung a key. There are armed men nearby. I realized right away that they were acting according to their own rules. It was not a zone, not a camp, not a perimeter. It was something different. The sect of labor. We only went out in the early morning. I raised my hands and showed my empty palms. One of the guards came out to meet them. He wasn't old, but he was covered in scars, bald-headed, and wearing a black leather apron. His name was Timofey. He didn't waste his time. He said bluntly, "If you're here, you're working. We don't take women for nothing. Either you give it back, or you stay with everything." I asked what "you give" meant. He didn't repeat it. I knew right away, Lena and Dina. He made a gesture to tie her up and take her to the hut. I said no. He chuckled. "So you're going to rot in the woods?" I nodded. "We're gone." We returned an hour later, at night. We walked around the farm, climbed through the pit, and made our way to the warehouse. I knew that if we didn't destroy them, they would come after us. They don't let go. We found a canister of diesel fuel and poured it on the walls. Zhenya threw the torch. Dina watched the flames rise to the sky. Not a single scream, just a crackle. We left before dawn. No one was chasing us. Apparently, those who didn't burn out ran away. We left the crosses in the ashes. The boy was burning. The heat was so intense that steam was coming off my skin. I gave him the last ampicillin. I found it in the city pharmacy. If it doesn't work, that's it. Lena was silent, but there was already a void in her eyes. Dina put her hand on the child's chest. Zhenya was sitting next to him, twirling a wire figure in his fingers. A cross, but inverted. I looked at them, and realized that one more day, and it would all be over. Either he dies, or we do. There was no more then in this world. Just a little more. At night we found an abandoned post. There must have been a cleaning service checkpoint here once. Everything is overgrown, the equipment has rotted. Only the container remains. Inside there are old boxes, bandages, and one oxygen tank. I lit a stove from an iron barrel, dried my clothes, and boiled the leftovers of dried cabbage. We sat in a circle and ate in silence. The boy was breathing faster. The temperature dropped slightly. Maybe the drug worked. Maybe it's just that the body has clung to its last strength. I did not know. I was just counting my breaths. Dina spoke at night. For the first time. She spoke softly, as if she was afraid her voice would be erased. Mine were here. I didn't understand right away. Who? Those who were burned in crosses. They were brought in earlier. Then she fell silent again, and I realized that this fire was not just revenge. It was the end for her, something that connected her to the past. Now she was moving on, with us. The next day we went to the railway. The rails were rusty and sagging, but there were poles running along them, which meant there was a connection. We moved along the sleepers. There should be an industrial cluster ahead, where warehouses used to be. There could have been antibiotics, water, maps, at least something. We had to live. One day, one step, one breath. Just don't stop. We walked along the sleepers for a long time. During the day they hid in ditches, under the canvas, among bushes, because drones began to fly from the south more often. At first it was just reconnaissance, then drones with infrared lenses. They weren't shooting, they were just marking. But if you were tagged, a truck would arrive the next day and the area would be swept. We walked at night like rats. The boy was breathing, but he hardly spoke. The temperature was holding up, the voice was gone. I wore it on myself. He weighed almost nothing. Only the warmth of his breath on her neck reminded her that he was alive. The railway took us to cluster number 14, a former industrial area where parts for drones and communication modules were produced before the event. After the cleaning, the disassemblers settled here. They were called in different ways. Butchers, suppliers, extractors. They didn't just kill, they cut out the right thing. The pickers had distribution deals for vials of blood, bones, organs, skin, rations, batteries, access. Some gave them themselves, voluntarily, for food. Someone lived without kidneys, someone without eyes. I saw one with empty eye sockets. He had a badge, stabilized participant. He was eating porridge and laughing. We entered at night. The cluster was guarded by a pair of lanterns and masked guards. I found an old passage through the drain manifold. It smelled worse than the oven. There was dead water, and grease was oozing out of the walls. We crawled along. Dina was not breathing. Lena was carrying Zhenya, and I was carrying the boy. When we got out, we were in the workshop. There are chains, tables, lamps, and surgical kits on the walls. They didn't work with anesthesia here. They just burned, cut, bandaged. Everything is sterile, as if by textbook, but without rules. I knew one of them. His name was Lazarus. He used to be a paramedic in oncology. Then he disappeared. Now he was here, in a leather apron, with a knife and a clipboard. He recognized me, even smiled. "You're alive," he said. "I thought you were burned out on the list." "Almost," I replied. He looked at the boy. "Infection. Lungs. There is a chance. But we need a recipient." I understood right away. This meant that one of us had to lie down on the table. Blood, cells, everything you need. I said. I am. He shook his head. Your code is dead. Even the machine won't accept you. We need someone with a clean archive. I didn't argue. He returned to his own people. He told the truth. Lena was silent, then looked at Dina. Dina didn't blink. I'll go, she said. I didn't believe it, she repeated. He's more important. He must live. We didn't argue. Lazarus took it, carefully, as if with a patient. He took me away. We were sitting in a corner, among boxes, among blood and bandages. Zhenya bowed his head. Lena hugged the boy. He was breathing a little quieter. Then he passed out. 2 hours later, Lazarus returned. He said it was over. He showed me a package of drugs. Antibiotics, syringes, a couple vials of blood. He gave us until morning. Dina didn't come back. I didn't ask. I knew where she was staying. The boy was asleep. I gave him an injection. The temperature dropped. He stopped raving. We survived. But something broke inside. It was as if with this injection, not only the inflammation had gone, but also the remnants of feeling. We left before dawn. Lazarus nodded goodbye to me. You're still human, he said. I didn't answer. A man is not a survivor. This is someone who remembers what he lived for. And I already had no reason, no memory. The only task is to get there, outside the perimeter, until the end. The railway went on. We walked along it, among the weeds, through the thickets, among the snow, among the blood, among the screams that were not there. There was a boy walking with us, with a lively look. Zhenya was walking with us, blind, but seeing more than us. Lena walked in silence. We were smaller than we were. But we were still moving, which means they haven't given up yet. The piece of hardware brought us to the line. The perimeter began abruptly, a rusty grid with signs, a gravel strip, towers. There was a 3-meter-high concrete wall along the border, covered in soot, collapsed in places, but still scary. We stopped at the landing, among the bare trees. The remains of a truck lay to the left. The cabin had burned down. The skeleton of the chassis had sunk into the ground. I came closer. There are a lot of black cards inside, all with the barcodes crossed out, the cold ones, burnt out. It's shaped like ours. Lena said softly. So no one came through. We waited for the night. The towers weren't glowing, but a diode was flashing on one, which meant the system was on standby. Without external feed, but it lives. I knew that each of them had an automatic turret module. Scans and shoots. As long as we don't go abroad. They weren't guarding the territory. They were locking it up. The drones have not flown for 2 days. Apparently the cluster decided that we were rotten. Lazarus may or may not have leaked information about our group. It didn't matter. We've reached it. Now there was the last step. Zhenya was the first to notice the funnel. I thought he felt the vibration. He always felt what we were missing. There was a moat behind the bushes. From an explosion, an old one, probably an artillery one. A half-collapsed tunnel ran through it. Not a subway, not a sewer. I went down first. A curved staircase led down. It smelled of cement and damp. There was an airlock at the end, made of steel and askew. He was only held by a rusty chain. I put my hand on the lock. The scanner lit up. I thought about it for a long time. Then it buzzed. The light turned green. The door didn't open. You're dead, Zhenya said from behind. But the system thinks he's alive. We waited a minute. Then the chain broke. The door slid open. A corridor opened up in front of us. Empty. Bright. Clean. White lamps. Silence. I could hear water dripping. We went inside. There is only blackness and cold behind us. They walked slowly. The walls were smooth, with cables and screens. On one of them, the inscription blinked, Zone 0, Transition, Identification. Then there was another door. There is a terminal nearby. There is a button on it. Pass activation. I pressed it. The ceiling hummed. The floor shook. We retreated. An opening opened in the wall. A drone came out. Not a military one, but a transport one. White body, Gray lenses, sign. Platform of the North. The Joint Recovery Council. Protocol of control of the sanitary cordon. He spoke. The voice was feminine, cold. Violation of the sanitary line. We were silent. Return to the residential area. I took a step forward. We don't belong to the sector. We're off base. The drone hovered. The violation has been confirmed. Confirm the status. We have no status. Biological mass without accounting is subject to withdrawal. I pulled out the drive. I have the data, all the lists, the entire recycling base. The drone went quiet. Then he uttered a phrase. Expect a response. We waited. In the corridor, the lights began to go out by sector. Gradually. One by one. There was a chill. Lena hugged the boy. Zhenya stood next to him. Put his hand on the wall. I held the flash drive in my hand, tightly, like a weapon. If the door doesn't open now, I'll smash everything to hell. At that moment, the drone blinked and beeped. Passage is allowed. Reset the protocol. The door opened in front of us. There was a light. It wasn't daytime. Domes covered the sky beyond the perimeter. But it was the air. Space. A silence in which there was no fear. We went in. The door closed behind us. Not automatically, but as if someone on the other side had closed it manually. There was a tunnel in front, wide, with rails and a platform. There was a carriage on it. The light was on inside. I looked at Lena. She nodded. Zhenya stepped in first. The boy was holding her hand. I was the last one in.